Hello and welcome to TRIGGERnometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kisin.
And this is a show for you if you want honest conversations with fascinating guests.
Our brilliant guests this week are Francis Foster.
Hello.
Introduce me, you fuckhead.
Yeah. And Konstantin Kisin.
Indeed, that is the guest. So a lot of you have been asking for us to interview each other, and this is it. Now, our show slogan used to be, we don't pretend to be the experts, we ask the experts, and for that very reason, Francis is going to interview me first.
Oh, right, okay, here we go. So, I guess the first question is, what's your background? Where do you come from?
Well, I think most of our viewers know where I come from at this point, since we bring it up every episode. And they also know that your mum's from Venezuela.
Yeah, but let's delve into it a little bit. What's it? What was your history growing up? What was it like growing up in the Soviet Union?
Yeah, it was a crazy time because the Soviet Union was this very stable place, seemingly, that collapsed overnight. And I kind of was growing up, my early formative years were very much around that. So we went from this very stable communist society to overnight to this rampant capitalist society. And it was just an interesting thing to observe more than anything as a boy, all of that happening. It was a very tumultuous time. And I obviously growing up in the Soviet Union and knowing the history of my family, many of whom were persecuted and sent to the gulags for having the wrong opinion, that informs a lot of my views and thoughts about what seems to be happening in the West right now.
And what was it like at that moment where the Soviet Union, because I always find this very interesting, the society changed, like you said, almost overnight. How did it change? Was it little things that you noticed, or was it everything different when you woke up one day?
Yeah, I think what it revealed is a lot of like the things that we take for granted, like stability and people behaving in a certain way and people being decent and honest, and all of that evaporated overnight. It was every man for himself. I think it just highlighted to me just the fact that we take a lot for granted and it can collapse and it can stop being the way that we're used to. I think most people in this country probably, I would imagine, and me to some extent as well, we think, our prosperity, our democracy, our freedoms, they're all givens, right? Which is one of the reasons I'm concerned about what seems to be happening with the extremes of politics emerging, is that they don't, particularly on the left, they don't seem to realize that if you start messing with the basic formula, then those things will go, right? So if you start shutting down freedom of speech, that doesn't just have an impact on freedom of speech, it has an impact on democracy, and democracy has an impact on prosperity. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a position where if you overthrow what you have, the place you end up could be very, very different and a lot worse than what you have.
Well, we've touched on freedom of speech, so let's delve a little bit into that. So there's a lot of people, I imagine people on the far left, who would say that actually there is no problem with freedom of speech. The people who say there's a problem with freedom of speech are essentially either incredibly cynical and looking to coin in on it, or make money out of it, I should say, or number two, just shallow-minded racists who want to hurl racial epithets
well,
at
mate,
people.
Obviously I want to be able to call black people the N-word. I mean, that's what my fight for free speech is all about, obviously, just like all of us. Look, the problem with, the reason that I oppose the woke movement in general is that they want to destroy what I believe are the founding principles of Western civilization, right? And I'm allowed to say this because I'm an immigrant. I think Western civilization is the best civilization.
I don't identify you as an immigrant. I identify you as problematic, but carry on.
I'm a problematic Brit now.
Yeah.
It's good to be one of you, finally.
Yeah.
I just need to develop a racist voice like you.
Yeah, exactly. It's got its advantages having a racist voice.
Yeah, like what?
Well, yeah, like I walk into a woke comedy club and I go, the thing is with immigrants, everybody leaves. Got the place to myself, do my emails.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
So just like every other gig you do as well.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, Western civilization is built on a few basic things, right? Freedom, democracy, and rationality and science, right? Without those things, you would not have what we have today, okay? Now, the woke movement essentially seeks to undermine and destroy all of those. So they seek to destroy freedom. How? By destroying freedom of speech, right? Why is freedom of speech important to freedom in general? Well, without the freedom to think, right, you can't have the free society that we have. And if you can't speak, you can't think. Now, the other problem is if I shut down your freedom to speak, that means I'm also shutting down my own freedom to listen, right? And one of the ways we learn and we have a cohesive society is the ability to communicate with each other. So freedom of speech also has a flip side, which is the freedom to listen to people with other ideas, right? If you shut all of that down, your other freedoms go out of the window, which is where we come on to democracy. You cannot have a democracy without a plurality of opinions. You know, there was a guy in the Russian parliament at some point, he said, parliament is no place for debate, right? So that's the mentality in authoritarian countries, right? So if you can't have a plurality of opinions, as we try to do on the show and as we try to encourage by having the show the way it is, you actually don't have democracy. Right. And that's another underpinning principle of what the great things that we have in this country and in the rest of the West. And finally, our prosperity is based to a very large extent on science and rationality, right? We would not be as prosperous, as wealthy, as comfortable as we are today if we did not have the scientific progress that we've had, right? Scientific progress is based on freedom. It's based on the freedom to pursue the goals of research that you have. I mean, we've had a number of social scientists on the show who are no longer able to do that, who are fearful that if they pursue the wrong research, they're going to be ostracized. I mean, Noah Kahl is a very good example of this, right? So without the freedom of research, you don't have rational scientific progress, and without that, you don't have the prosperity that we have. So the reason I oppose the woke movement is not that I want to shout obscenities at people. It's that it's an attempt, deliberate or not, I don't know, to destroy everything that makes this country great. And I don't want that. I didn't come here to see that happen.
And it's interesting you say that. And so, for instance, people would say, like, there's no problem with freedom of speech. Like, you came out in favour of not deplatforming Katie Hopkins, not removing her Twitter account, which I think has still been removed as of today.
Despite my powerful voice in the conversation.
Despite your powerful voice. What do you say to those people who say, look, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of these, they're private platforms, they're owned by private companies, they are free to do as they please and they're free to platform who they want. And actually removing someone's account is not an issue with freedom of speech at all.
Well, you see, the thing there is that actually it's funny that a lot of people on the left say that while they're also massively in favor of nationalizing things, right? Yeah. I mean, essentially Facebook, YouTube, all these other social media platforms, Twitter, etc., they have privately nationalized, if you like. They've taken complete control of what used to be the public square, right? And there are several problems with that. One of them is, of course, restriction of people like us. We've had videos taken down for hate speech. And then
quite rightly so as well, deeply problematic.
Reinstated later. But the other problem with it is that what happens is, the way I think about it is essentially you had a public square where people would come and talk, right? And what these companies have done very, very well, very successfully, is they've opened like a little Starbucks off the public square. And they've said, look, why would you have your conversation in the public square where it's cold, it's muddy, it's, you know, you're out there in the elements? Come inside, have a nice social justice frappuccino, right? Just sit here and enjoy it and talk in here. And they've created a great place for people to come, right? So then everybody comes into this little social justice Starbucks, and we're all suddenly finding that that's the new public square.
Yeah.
And once that's happened, they go, okay, now we have a bunch of rules about what you are not allowed to say, right? And what that does is, first of all, obviously marginalizes people who have non-conforming opinions, which again is counter to the principles of Western civilization. But what it also does, and this is very dangerous, very, very dangerous, and I'm concerned about the rise of the far right as I am about the far left. It drives people with genuinely problematic opinions into their own little beer cellars that they start to open up. So the 8chans and the 4chans of the world, where essentially it's only people who have problematic opinions. Instead of having those opinions ventilated, challenged, debated, and having reasonable people like us going, well, this is too far. You know, they just marinate in their own insanity in these places. And that's the other problem, is if you push these people out into their own little space, they end up radicalizing themselves. They self-radicalize. And a lot of the problems that you see, you know, as you and I know, you know, men are being demonized in society, but there's also a counter movement to that, which is these women-hating, genuinely toxic, unpleasant, basement-dwelling incels
it's a bit harsh. The London open mic circuit isn't that bad.
who genuinely hate women.
Yeah.
You know, and you and I have experienced this online when we've gone to different places to look at, you know, where should we post our content. There are some groups that talk about the problems with feminism, which are very reasonable. Yeah. There are other places that just literally full of misogyny. Right. And the reason for that is that these people are being driven into their own little echo chamber by being excluded from the main conversation. If they had their problematic opinions out there in the public square, they would have people that they like and respect sometimes challenging their own opinions. Yeah. You know, it's like when fans of our show watch us and they someone mentions some weird conspiracy and we go, come on, I don't think that's true. That actually has the potential to change people's opinions about things, which is why it's important for that conversation to be had. So I don't agree at all with this idea that they're just private companies. They're not. They've privatized, they've nationalized essentially the public square into private ownership by one group. And that's dangerous and a problem. We need to find a way of dealing with that, whether that's, you know, a First Amendment for the internet of some kind or whether it's breaking those companies up.
And it's interesting that you say that, and we were talking, I remember the Count Dankler interview we did, which was almost a year ago now. Yeah. And if you haven't seen it or listened to it, check it out, it's brilliant. And he said something what I found quite poignant, and it's almost, we don't believe in forgiveness anymore. I think we've now got this attitude where if somebody does something wrong, we immediately cancel them, despite who it may be, despite, you know, everything that they've done and, you know, their whole history or whatever else. They've done this one thing, no matter how trivial, and then that seems to be over for them.
Yeah, I'm also concerned about the unfair criticism of Jimmy Savile.
He raised a lot of money for spinal charities and a great friend of the royal family. But anyway, so we've seen that. Do you think there's a problem with forgiveness in society at the moment?
Yeah, I do. I do think there is a problem. And the thing that probably worries me even more than that is just how quickly the norms of society are changing to the point where you don't really know what is tolerable or acceptable anymore. So I posted a Twitter clip of Robin Williams on my Twitter last night of him doing jokes about Barack Obama. This was 12 years ago. 12 years is not a long time. Yeah. And he's talking about how Barack Obama is a very eloquent man, but I know a lot of people were expecting him to kind of, essentially what he's saying, to black it up at the inauguration. And he does like this whole black accent and let me introduce you to my political posse. This is little Ray Ray, you know, Kanye, Kobe, and Colin Powell, who's bad to the bone, right? And you know, talks about how they're going to open up a basketball court in the Rose Garden, right? That was 12 years ago, and that was one of the most beloved comedians in the history of comedy, right? If a comedian did that on stage today, 12 years later, I mean, it's over.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Game over.
Yeah,
You're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah.
Now, if that is the extent to which these things can change in this shorter period of time, what it leaves a lot of people with is, well, I don't even know what the right thing is anymore. We're kind of in this limbo. A good example of this is, I think I might have mentioned it previously. My wife and I, over Christmas, we tend to watch a lot of movies, just spend some time together, maybe watch like a Die Hard kind of for Christmas kind of thing. And we were watching one of the Die Hard movies, and there's this moment in it which just blew my mind, where there's a black woman who's managing the telephone calls for like a police department. And due to some kind of emergency, she's forced to manage the phone calls for a whole city. And when her supervisor comes in and tells her this, she says, if you think that's going to happen, you think I'm going to marry Donald Trump. Right? A black woman using Donald Trump as an aspirational figure, saying, you know, this is like the thing that in my imagination would be the best thing ever.
Well, that's how Melania saw it, didn't she?
You said Melania's black. She's going to Justin Trudeau herself. So the norms of society have changed dramatically. Our expectations of what is and isn't racist have changed dramatically. So what you find yourself is the examples like Alistair Stewart, right, who sent a poem to somebody, a white person and then a black person. And it never occurred to him that people would choose to interpret some words in a Shakespeare poem as racist. But the society has moved on so quickly that he even hasn't had a chance to catch up to it. So even if you accept that these norms are good and right, which I don't, but even if you accept them, the pace at which this progressivism is advancing makes it almost impossible for anyone to actually understand what the right thing, the socially correct thing is anymore. And of course, we've completely redefined all of the meanings of all these words. Racism doesn't mean what racism used to mean. Racism used to mean being prejudiced against somebody on the basis of their skin color. Now racism means that you were insensitive to something that you're supposed to have anticipated about how your words could be misinterpreted, right? So you said it yourself, I think, to me the other day. Racism now means you said something that could be misinterpreted. That's where we are.
His words are quoted out of context. I did not mean that. I'm going to back the fuck away from those words. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, and that's essentially where we are. And I mean, it's not a particularly pleasant question to ask because it's sort of an impossible question to answer. But how do you see the landscape panning out within the next few years? Do you think that we've sort of hit, as Rod Liddell would say, peak wank? Or do you think things are going to get worse before they get better? Or are they just going to keep getting worse?
I think it's impossible to say, isn't it? I was very optimistic at the beginning of the year with the election of the Conservative Party, not because I necessarily think that we should have a Conservative Party in government forever, but I just thought that was such a blow back against this woke culture that people would be forced to wake up. I don't think that's happened. I don't see that happening. And if you look at, the Prime Minister is making very conciliatory noises and all these things, he's definitely not going further to the right. He's trying to keep the middle together. Despite all of that, people are still reacting as if, we've got a fascist in 10 Downing Street. So I do think it looks like it will get worse before it gets better. But what I'm deeply encouraged by is there's a counterculture emerging. I think we're part of that. Comedy Unleashed is part of that. There are people who are starting to wake up to the fact that the way that they've been told is the right way to think isn't actually the way that most people think. And I'm very proud of the fact that we've created a platform where people with the countering ideas to that can come on, Zuby, Lawrence Fox, a bunch of other people who now have a voice in society, which is prominent and powerful. We were the first people to ever do a long-form interview with them about these issues. I'm very proud of that. I think it's important that we do that because my fundamental goal with TRIGGERnometry is to bring people together. And the only way you can bring people together is if you actually have honest conversations and allow people to say what they think.
Anton, you're meant to unfold the Nazi banner when he was saying that. It just unfolded and Deutschland über alles was going to play. So it's interesting. Let's talk about comedy because we're both comedians.
Not everyone agrees with that statement.
Yeah, it's true. How do you see the comedy landscape at the moment? Do you think we're in a healthy place comedically? Or do you think that comedy is fundamentally biased? It's not comedy. The comedy
That's a leading fucking question right there, isn't it?
The comedy industry is biased.
I think the comedy industry is biased, will always be biased. It's just the nature of it. I mean, all the psychological research shows that, people who are kind of more conservative leaning tend to go into kind of managerial professions, the law, things like that.
Because they pay.
Exactly. And liberal, more kind of open-minded people, open-mindedness as a trait psychologically, not as a value judgment, tend to go into the liberal professions, the arts, comedy, etc. So comedy will always have that slant. The question is, how does the comedy industry treat people who don't fall into that? Because it's perfectly possible for the comedy industry to be full of people who are progressive or on the left, if you like, or on this kind of new left. But for those people to be actually open-minded and say, well, it's great that, we've got the Jeff Norcotts and the Simon Evans and the, Dominic Frisbees and Alistair Williams and the Andrew Lawrences and the Francis Fosters and the Constantine Kissins of the world, right? If that were the case, I'd have no problem with the fact that more open-minded liberal people go into comedy. The problem for me seems to be that those people are incredibly narrow-minded. They're incredibly close-minded. They don't want people with a different opinion, and they see them as bad and wrong and evil. That, to me, is the problem. But equally that, I always say to people, talking to Andrew Doyle or people like that who are concerned about the state of comedy and all that kind of thing, is that, look, all the people that you respect in the history of comedy, they always pushed against the grain. All of them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my favourite are people who sort of parrot the Liberal consensus. And, you know, it's fair enough that you support it, but, you know, when you seem to support every aspect of it, you start to think, well, you're not entirely thinking for yourself. But then they say that they love Patrice O'Neill. I mean, if Patrice O'Neill was alive today, his career would last about 6.5 minutes before he got shut down. But it's an important point you're making, because ultimately, if you want to be a comedian and you want to be an interesting comedian and you want to be someone who people talk about, then you've got to piss a few people off.
And I don't even see it as pissing people off. I mean, for me, the goal is whenever I go on stage, and, you know, you saw me try some new material about why I respect Donald Trump, right? It's not because I actually respect Donald Trump necessarily.
He does.
Yeah, I do. No.
And the crowd really didn't like it either.
They liked some bits.
Yeah, they did like some bits. But there was that moment where you said that. The collective tightening of arseholes was a thing to behold.
But that's exactly what I'm trying to do every time I go on stage, is I want those arseholes to tighten, and then to use logic and humor to unlock the arsehole.
I really wanted you to say the words logics and facts. Cole Ben Shapiro on them.
Yeah. No, but I mean, to me, that's really the greatest comedy is when someone says something abhorrent and then logically proves why it's funny to say that.
Yeah.
That to me is Bill Burr is a master of this.
Of course,
you know. That to me is the goal, if you like. So my goal is when I go on stage is to say something that shocks people and then make a joke that forces them to laugh. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And that will always be a harder path, because it's much easier to write a joke about how Donald Trump's orange and Boris is fat and whatever. But never interested me.
No, it's not. The challenge, I think, comes with that type of comedy. It's, like you said, trying to get people laugh despite themselves. And Trump is become a hack topic, even though deep down I don't believe there are any hack topics in comedy, only hack approaches. And actually getting somebody to laugh about Trump, even though that they might profess to hate him. Because there's so many parts of Trump that we don't acknowledge. He's going to win again, isn't he?
Yeah, he's absolutely going to win again. He's going to win again. And again, I hope that will be a wake-up moment, because, look, this is a thing that we get asked very often, and even conservative-leaning people who like us now start to call us conservative. Neither of us is conservative.
I would identify actually as socially conservative.
Yeah. Well, you're straight, white, and racist. But, no, I know what you mean, but you are not a supporter of the Conservative Party, right? And I am politically very much in the centre. I am certainly socially conservative on some things. I'm very, very socially liberal on other things. And I can't remember how we got into this conversation, but we're here.
We were talking about Trump and whether he's going to get elected or not.
So my point is, Donald Trump is not a natural politician who I have a lot of affinity with. I would not if you gave me a field of candidates from the far right to the far left, and Donald Trump was one of them, he would not be who I picked. I'd want someone much further to the right, obviously.
It's interesting when people criticise him. He's not actually that far to the right.
No, of course he's not.
And he's very funny as well, which is quite sad.
He's very funny.
Yeah. Anyway.
But my point is, I would want someone who is a centrist Democrat, if you like, or a very centrist Republican, somewhere within that center field, right? That's my natural instinct. And I don't genuinely approve of politicians who are outlandish, who are inconsiderate with their language, who offend lots of people. I'm not naturally drawn to that. But in the social space that we have now, if you give me the choice between Hillary Clinton or the woke brigade on the current Democratic left and Donald Trump, it's a binary choice. And the problems on the left are so great that you're forcing me to go in that other direction. Not because I like Donald Trump, but because those are the only two options. And it's as you know, I voted for the Conservatives for the first time in my life at the last election. It's the same thing. I mean, I look at, and this is kind of where we are.
Can I just interrupt? You didn't put a cross, did you? You put a little swastika in the...
That's exactly what I do. Jewish swastika.
Jewish
Star of David with a swastika over the top. So, and that's because, I mean, this is the other thing we've lost, is the ability to distinguish between liking somebody and acknowledging their competence. Boris Johnson ran an incredibly effective campaign. Dominic Cummings, his principal advisor, I've read some of his blog posts. That guy's intelligent as fuck. He's intelligent, incredibly intelligent. Donald Trump, say what you want about him, he's been incredibly effective at what he does.
Of course he is.
I watched his State of the Union. I mean, it wasn't the way it's normally done, but as a reality TV show, it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
With all those stories and all that stuff. So these people are good at what they do, right? And the problem for the other side is, where's the competence? Where are the people who are actually good at being politicians who will bring the country together? And as long as there's no one like that, well, they're never going to get elected. And I'm not going to vote for someone who I think is an idiot, you know? So that's the problem.
So you remember the Yang Gang?
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't look like the Yang is going to get elected. So
who do you think will do?
It looks like Pete Buttigieg is doing well at the moment. I mean, as we record this anyway. Who knows, man? It's all up for grabs. Joe Biden.
That was an unfortunate up for grabs in Joe Biden. If that's not a Freudian slip.
Donald Trump as well.
Yeah.
A battle of the grabbers.
Yeah. Well, he's more of a hair sniffer, isn't he?
Biden is.
Yeah. He likes a good old.
Yeah.
Why not?
Thanks for bringing. What do you mean? Why not?
Why not? Everyone needs a hobby, mate.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I don't know who's going to win. But if it's Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, I mean, they're all so far to the left. I just don't see anyone going for that. And as I say, the only positive that can come out of that is they get a wake-up call. And you know, in history, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the moment someone veers off far to the left, or to the right, eventually there's a counter narrative that comes out, and you know, Tony Blair was a good example of this in the 90s. You know, people were tired of the conservative government, but they also didn't want a socialist in power. So along comes someone who's more of centrist, and you can kind of bring the country together for a bit.
Well, people forget about Blair and the Conservative Party. That election was very, very unusual because it was a landslide, but also the Conservatives left a country that economically was in very, very healthy.
Yeah.
So that when Blair took over it, actually, you know, the country was in a pretty good state.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens in 2020. But as I say, I hope people start now to wake up to the realization that going far off the deep end, saying that, you know, controlling immigration is racist and all this other bullshit, that's a wake-up call, and people start to realize we need to talk honestly and openly about these issues instead of shutting them down.
I still think you're drinking Christmas sherry. I laud your optimism, but I don't think it's going to happen.
All right. Well, what about you, my friend? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what's your background.
Right. Okay. So I was born and brought up in South London. My mother is from Venezuela. Everybody who listens to the podcast,
have a drink.
Have a drink, have a shot, whatever it may be. So my mum grew up very, very wealthy in Venezuela. She was from a very wealthy background, from a great privilege, wealth and status, and all the rest of it. In 1999, Hugo Chavez was elected, and one of my relatives was actually president of the Bank of Venezuela at that time. So, and I think it was around 2003, 2004, where Chavez demanded to my relative that he essentially hand over all the gold reserves to him and his family, and that he could distribute them in the way he saw fit. To
the people, no doubt.
Yeah, of course, and the people being his family. And my relative said, no, that gold belongs to Venezuela. It does not belong to you. I will not sanction that. Chavez went on TV and said the words, Diego Luis fuera, which means Diego Luis get out. My relative was then put under house arrest until he gave up that gold, all of Venezuela's gold to Chavez.
What a pussy.
No, I know. He should have had the courage of his convictions. I'm sure all the keyboard warriors behind would be like, oh, I would have done it.
Yeah. If I was in Nazi Germany, I would have shot Hitler myself. Yeah.
And the reason I always talk about Venezuela is I need you to know I'm not just a straight white male. But no, there's an important reason. Because
Francis is actually coming out as gay.
Yeah, I'm doing a Philip Schofield.
Yeah.
No, the reason I'm doing that is because that has essentially informed all of my thinking from essentially the start of my adult life. Because when Chavez came to power, a lot of people thought he was going to make a real difference to Venezuela. And initially he did, that it was going to be a new dawn, because before that there was a government which was deeply corrupt, as most Latin American governments are. And it was also racist. However, what happened with Chavez is that he then brought in widespread socialism, and then the country became ever more corrupt. And him and Maduro turned a country which was the 5th biggest oil producer in the world, with the largest oil reserves in the world, into a country now which has a larger migrant population than Syria and has got inflation rates of over something like 1 million %. As one of our former guests said, Vladimir Hernandez, make up a number regarding inflation and in Venezuela, and it's probably higher than that, to the point where you go into a supermarket in Venezuela and it's highly unlikely that you'll find any goods. And if you do, they don't attach prices to them, because by the end of the trading day, they will become obsolete. I've also seen the way that freedom of speech has been affected. My cousin, who's a journalist in Venezuela, had to leave because in Venezuela there is a secret police called the Sabin. And what they do is, if you are known to criticize the government, be openly critical of the government, write articles that are criticizing the government, they will turn up at your flat at 1 o'clock in the morning normally, wearing ski masks.
They're very punctual.
Yeah, they're very punctual, unlike most Latin Americans. Yeah. Knock on the door and then you will disappear. You'll be put in something called la tumba, which is not difficult to guess what la tumba is. It roughly translated, more accurately translated, it means the tomb. Yeah. And you will disappear. Sometimes you will come back, sometimes you won't, but it's touch and go as to what happens. So he fled the country. I've had most of my family now living in different countries. Most of them are in South America. A couple of months ago, I was talking to my cousin Johan, who said that we have regular electrical blackouts. Running water is so toxic that you can't actually drink the running water. He drinks from a water tank which is on his roof in his house, and people actually go and steal the water from the water tank. So that's where Venezuela is at the moment. It causes me a tremendous amount of pain. When I was 30 years old, my grandfather was murdered, which is a murder that I will never get justice for, because it's a lawless state. There's no police. That's where we are in Venezuela. And I've always been someone who's been on the left. Politically, I see myself as being on the left. I believe that ultimately the left stands for reduction of inequality between rich and poor. I believe that society, especially in this country, because of the class system, is still very, very unequal. And it's something I truly believe in. However, I watched with horror and dismay as Corbyn essentially embraced and supported the Chavez government, then the Maduro government. He refuses to condemn them. He refuses to speak out against them. The Guardian, a lot of their journalists openly supporting the Venezuelan government, people like Owen Jones, talking about how actually that it's a force for good in the world, despite the fact that journalists were disappearing or having to leave. And it made me incredibly worried, because if you have those people in power, they're people who, A, do not respect the rule of law, and B, they do not respect freedom of speech. And I saw that Labour Party as being dangerous, fundamentally, deeply dangerous. And I hear people talking about socialism on the left, and having seen what's happened in Venezuela, go from a very, very wealthy country to a country where there's no toilet paper, there's no harina pan, and harina pan is maize, and that with maize you make arepa, which is a staple diet of every Venezuelan, and there is none. There is none wherever you look, and people cannot afford to feed their children. And they talk about socialism. I always think that you do not know the forces that you are messing with. And then,
I don't think they do, but do you think maybe they mean something else when they talk about social? Do you think it's just this utopia in their heads that they imagine this perfect world where man has been improved and we're now all perfect and equal and blah, blah, blah?
Before, I might have been more charitable, but all of those people supported Venezuela. All of those people supported Chavez's government. And then when it turned sour, they all walked away and washed their hands. Which could be understandable, but essentially that is my family, and that is a country where I spend a large part of my life in. So your opinions and your actions have consequences. And I understand if you support Chavez and then Maduro, And then Renee got on that and go, look, I was wrong, I was incorrect, that was a mistake on my part. But they seem to have no desire to. And they're still peddling this socialist agenda. And when you have someone like Ash Sarkar come on, Good Morning Britain, and say the words, I am literally a communist, and then people tweeting about how that is somehow, worthwhile and noble and something that should be supported. I find it quite frankly terrifying, because unless you grow up in that country, unless you have seen the evils of socialism and communism, you really have no idea of what the impact that has on the society, freedom of speech, and the lives of your relatives and the lives of ordinary day-to-day people, where people feel so terrified that they can't speak, that they live their life in permanent fear. I'll give you an example. A very good friend of mine who has now had to leave Venezuela, he now lives in America. He came over to the UK, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And we sat down and we had dinner. It was him, myself, my parents. Both my parents are mid to late 70s now. They're elderly people. And they've known Henry since he was a baby. And we were talking. And my dad said to him, Henry, could you please speak up? I can't hear what you're saying. And Henry said to him, I'm very sorry, Jim. I will speak louder. It's just in Venezuela, we're so used to whispering. And I found that incredibly powerful. Living in a country where you are used to whispering. And then living in the UK for the last couple of years with Corbyn, and seeing people going on TV saying, I'm literally a communist. Because to me, that is the ultimate goal of socialism and communism, is to make everybody the same. And how do you make everybody the same? You make everybody think the same. And how do you make everybody think the same? You destroy all opinions that are not your opinion. And it's terrifying. And I never thought I'd say this as someone who has always been on the left, but I was happy when Johnson won. And I'm glad I didn't vote for them. I voted SDP, which is a sort of left-wing, socially conservative party.
Good old problematic.
Yeah, good old problematic. But that's where we are. And I'm hopefully.
So were you happy that Boris won, or were you happy that Labour lost?
I was happy that Labour lost.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I wasn't happy that Boris won. I think ultimately, if you look at what the Conservatives have done over 10 years, which is preside over austerity, which has created so much hardship. You look, we're filming this in London. Anecdotally, how many more homeless people do you see?
Oh, it's unbelievable, man. Every time we walk to the tube station here, there's just tents everywhere. Yeah. And it wasn't like that before.
No, I've lived in this city all my life. I grew up here in the 80s when actually, as a city, it wasn't as wealthy as it is now. I never used to see tents. There were homeless people, but certainly not on this number.
I mean, I don't know. The austerity is such a big tent thing. So, I mean, we'll soon be talking to Liam Halligan about his new book about the housing crisis. Yeah. That, to me, seems to be a bipartisan issue. Yes. Right? I'm not sure that the Conservatives have necessarily caused that. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. But I think what is undeniable is that what the Conservatives have done is it cuts to local services, cuts to local government, cuts to mental health services. So, for instance, my girlfriend works in mental health, and the cuts that she's facing as part of her job means that, unfortunately, more and more children are slipping through the cracks and not getting the support they so desperately need.
And they'll then end up on the street, because mental health is a huge factor in that.
Yes, and it also, what it doesn't acknowledge as well is something like, I think it was 45 or 50% of prisoners have a special need. Yeah. So it costs roughly £30,000 a year to keep somebody in prison. But actually...
It's a very strong reason to advocate for the death penalty, isn't it?
The uniquely Russian approach. Yeah. When actually, if we caught these people earlier and gave them the necessary support, it wouldn't have the impact later on in life. So I don't agree with the austerity. I think there was there's an argument economically that we did need it, but I think proportionally it hurt a lot of the weakest people. And
so it wasn't done in a fair way, you feel?
Yeah, I don't think it was done in a fair way.
That's probably something I can agree with, even though personally I actually think we needed more austerity from a broader economic perspective. Yeah. I mean, the indebtedness of this country on a personal and national level is unfathomable how much in debt we are. And at some point, someone's going to have to do something about it. And it's either going to be us or your grandchildren. Yeah. What do you want? Well, your grandchildren, probably.
Yeah. But the thing is as well, that is not just a problem unique to this country. No. Remember when we spoke to Jim Rickards?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's a problem across the West. Actually, Russia uniquely has a surplus.
Does it?
It doesn't have a budget deficit.
That's what happens when you get Putin in charge.
Exactly. Massive gold reserves as well.
Really?
Jim would be very happy. Jim has a huge respect for Russia.
Does.
But anyway, so you're kind of opposed. But one of the things that you often get criticized for is people say, "Oh, you're just this leftist cuck."
Yeah.
And I don't. I've never seen you that way. Understood why. I mean, I think it was interesting on the live stream the other day. You said that when we interviewed Sargon, which was over a year ago.
Yeah.
You were much more kind of hesitant about some of his views because you used to be a lot more woke.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you've become less woke as things change, or is it more that you've become more vocal about what you actually think?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a clarification of my views. I understand a lot more about the subjects that we're talking about. You listen to people who are actually very informed about what they're discussing, and as a result of that, you can't help but formulating your ideas. I also think as well, more and more I think about this is with the European Union, freedom of immigration, no borders.
I don't fucking like it, mate.
As somebody who, whose mum was a first-generation immigrant, all the rest of it, I don't think ultimately that it works for a lot of people. And I understand why people do not want freedom of immigration. I think immigration is healthy and is necessary for a country. I think open borders makes it incredibly difficult to plan when you don't know how many people are coming into a particular country, especially when most of them will come to London, understandably so. If I was an immigrant, you'd come here because of the jobs and all the rest of it, whilst at the same time having a housing crisis. How can you plan for that? It's simply impossible. And I think more and more I've become disillusioned with the left because of just the name calling. If you're a conservative person, whether economically or socially, that automatically makes you a bad person. That automatically means you're racist, you're stupid, you're all these things. And it's simply not true.
It's fascinating to me out of doing trigonometry, just how many people we've met who have this terrible reputation.
Yeah.
Who keep being called names by the people that we share stages with every night. And then you meet this person and you go, this is like one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible how people, and then when you find yourself, as you've done and I've done in the newspapers or whatever, right, with hit pieces, and you go, okay, nothing that's in the news generally is true. People being called and smeared, it's all bullshit for the most part.
Absolutely. And there's, for instance, when Vice wrote that, which I found deeply upsetting, when Vice wrote that article about me. Well, not about me. It was about the Comedy Unleashed.
But they started with you.
Yeah, they started with me. It's almost like they knew I was coming. And they said that it was a far-right comedy night, despite the fact that the original MC who had to drop out because she had another gig is Rialina, who is a mixed-race woman. And then you look at the people who've been on. You've had Sadia Asmat, who is a Muslim woman who wears a hijab while she's on stage. You've had Dame Baptiste, who is a black comic. You've had Shapi Sandy, who's headlined it, who is an Iranian woman. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter because they have a narrative. And, they have a narrative which they adhere to. And facts don't matter. And then this article was then retweeted by lots of people. And I was still a teacher at that point. I could have lost my job. I could have never have worked again because I was a figurehead for a far-right comedy night. And my head teacher actually saw that article. But he was saying, it's nonsense and, we'll support you and all the rest of it. But that doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter that I could have lost my job. That actually I could have
Well, it does matter. That's what they want.
Yeah. That I could have, I could have been banned from the teaching profession because ultimately...
For the second time.
Yeah, for the second time. We don't talk about the first time. Because ultimately, I'm a racist. And by appearing at Comedy Unleashed, I somehow support the far right.
Well, mate, you're white, you've got tattoos. You wear Fred Perry and polo shirts.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah. 1 + 1 = 19.
About 19, exactly. Yeah. So what do you think I'm drinking the Christmas sherry in being somewhat hopeful that people might start to wake up and realize that this approach doesn't work?
Yeah.
Do you not think that's going to happen?
No, I don't.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think that what happens is they're going to be ever more emboldened, ever more entrenched. They're going to just drill down into their ideas that, everyone who doesn't agree with them is stupid, racist, and all the rest of it. I mean, this has been best summed up by Rebecca Long Bailey, who gave Jeremy Corbyn's leadership 10 out of 10. the worst election result since 1930, whatever it is, losing all your major heartlands or the vast majority of them, and that is 10 out of 10 leadership?
But this is the point I'm making. Eventually, someone is going to go, this doesn't work. Someone is going to come out and go, look, we need to start winning power again, right? Just as Tony Blair did, right?
Well,
just as David Cameron was exactly the same thing. He came out after a period of Tory they went through the Ian Duncan Smiths and the William Hagues and all these people. And eventually someone came along who could bring the party together, get them to stop banging on about Europe for a bit, right, etc. So all of this always comes back to, once you go far off the deep end, eventually the veil is lifted from your eyes.
Okay, eventually, but I think it's going to be a really, really long time. Because look at all the candidates that Labour have got at the moment. What Labour need to do in order to win, and this is going to really upset a few people on the left, is they need to accept that the vast majority of this country, people in this country,
is racist.
Are socially conservative. Left of centre, social conservatives. And if you want to capture those hearts and minds, you have to create policies that appeal to those people. But I don't think they're interested in that.
So they would have to start talking about family, community, crime, law and order, immigration, right? All
public services.
Public services, importance of the family, right? Stable household, etc. But all of these things are problematic. Right? So
in particular, the immigration.
Oh, yeah.
I think you would not, I can't think of one leftist politician who would talk open and honestly about immigration and reduction of immigration and get anywhere near power. Not just
right
power,
now.
Anywhere near power.
Well, I mean, Paul Embry made this point when I pressed him on whether he would run for office. I mean, Paul Embry, in my opinion, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but in my opinion, I look at him and I go, this could be a future prime minister.
Yeah.
That's how I see him.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong about that. I don't know how good he is at managing people or his analytical skills or whatever. But as a person,
as a presence.
As a presence, you go, that is a guy that I don't agree with a lot of his. I mean, he's a socialist economically, and that I just look at him and I go, well, that's a man that I respect, right? Yeah. There are plenty of people like that, but as he said, he's not going to get anywhere near being an MP or let alone prime minister in the current Labour Party. But my point is, at some point in the next 10 years, somebody in the Labour Party is going to have to go, look, we want to win, right? So we need someone like that to actually, represent us. That's going to happen. It has to.
Does it?
Yeah.
Does it? Yeah. I've come to the point with the left where they're more interested in being right than winning.
They've always been more interested in being right than winning. But what it takes is someone like Tony Blair or someone like that to come in and go, we've had a really bad run of this. Let's get this shit together. But
then it would mean them accepting that talking about immigration and reduction of, and reduction to the amount of people coming into this country, maybe having a different system, whatever it may be, is not racist. And that's going to take a long, long, long time. And I don't see it happening anytime soon. And like I said, let's go back to the candidates.
Yeah, it's not going to happen in this election, that's obvious.
Right, and what about the next election? Probably not as well.
Well, we don't know what will happen. But yeah, I mean, I take your point. I think you're right. It will take some time. It does look like the Tories are going to be in power for another 10 years.
Yeah, it's going to take. And then when you look at it over,
That's 20 years in power.
20 years in power.
Fucking hell. That is quite impressive, isn't it? Just how loony the left has become.
And this is somebody who is talking to you as somebody who's on the centre. It's very worrying. And it's even if you were on the right, it's still very worrying. Because what this country needs is a strong, powerful, well-led opposition. And we don't have that. We have no opposition.
You're right. I mean,
it's dangerous.
This is well, but that's why immigration has become such an issue, because the Labour government was very powerful and had an incredibly weak and divided opposition. And that's why they were able to introduce these immigration policies that just allowed more people to come into this country, as William Clouston told us, in 10 years than had come into this country its entire history since 1066, right? And that was because there was no strong opposition.
Absolutely. And then you start to think to yourself more and more, if there is no strong opposition to this Conservative government, which there isn't, they've got carte blanche to do whatever they want.
This is why I'm not happy about to some extent about what's happened, because if you're on the right, you're celebrating right now. You know, you're going to be in power for a long time. Your values are going to be implemented. Blah 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 blah. But I, like you, believe that we need a strong debate between the two sides, which is why I think we do the show, right?
Absolutely, it's why we do the show. But you see it in when we're trying to get people on, guests on, the dearth of intellectually robust left-wing thinkers. There's a dearth.
Yeah.
And really, because I'm on the left, and we always try and balance the show. People, you know, have got their own agenda and say whatever they may say, but we genuinely do. And there have been times where we sat down and you've gone, right, okay, present me with guests from the left who you want to listen to. I come up with the same 7 or 8 names.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And we've had half of them on the show.
Yeah, we've had half of them on the show. And it's coming to the point.
And it's literally, you go from Paul Embry and then it's like the Ash Sarkars and the Aaron Bastanis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Carla.
Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah, who would be great, and we'd love to have him on, and it'd make a fantastic episode. But there's very few people putting that reasonable debate using logic without descending into hurling epithets and all the rest of it and screeching. I'll be honest with you, every time I see people on the left in a debate, a large part of them, I end up having my head in my hands because they're not interested in winning hearts and minds, which means they're not interested in winning an election. And that means ultimately that you are always going to live in a country which is being dominated by a right of centre or a right-wing government.
Up the fash.
Up the fash. Oh, God, every time I talk, it gets depressing. But I think that's where we are.
And where do you think culturally we are as a country? Do you think people are going to, on the right, maybe, or the socially conservative part of society is now going to kind of be emboldened by everything that's happened?
I can see the culture war deepening. I think that the woke aspect of the left, they have no interest in changing their views. They ultimately believe that what they think and say is right. They're not going to change. My worry is society is going to become ever more polarized. That's what I really worry about. And that ultimately we are not going to be able to do what is necessary for society to function, which is sit around at a table, listen to each other, share ideas, and have a debate. And debate means to listen. It's not about winning. It's not about destroying or all of these.
Even though it makes for great clickbait.
Or all of these, things that ultimately it's about ego. It's about listening. It's about trying to improve as a person. And right now, where we are, I find it incredibly worrying.
I mean, how do you feel about, I think it was Rebecca Long Bailey, if I'm not wrong, saying that she doesn't have any Tory friends?
I think that is a sign of a childish and immature person, and ultimately somebody who is incredibly illiberal. If you do not have friends who have difference of opinion to you, then ultimately you are somebody who is not living a full life. I'm an atheist. I have friends who are religious. I see myself now actually as a socially conservative. I have friends who are very, very liberal, because it's only by surrounding yourself with people who have difference of opinion to you do you ultimately grow as a human being.
Very good.
Yeah, that was all right, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, since we've done this, how long do you think it's going to take for us to get cancelled again?
Again,
Yeah.
I'm at that point, I think, where we're just in the permanent state of ongoing cancellation.
Yeah.
Well, I've kind of got used to it. I don't even tend to think about it. But yeah, I always feel like there's something around the corner where one misstep. I mean, so much. The fascinating thing to me is how people don't understand irony.
Yeah.
Like, whenever you and I make an ironic joke, like pretending to be sexist or something for the purposes of a joke, half the people watching go, "Oh, he hates women." And it's like, so you and I, as comedians who do our thing publicly, are always, I feel like, one step away, which is why I just preempt it now and I just go, I don't give a shit, about this whole thing.
But it's crept into comedy that now you can't make a joke anymore. Well, you can, obviously you can make a joke. That's going to be misinterpreted.
You can't make a joke.
I can't fucking make a joke. No, you make a joke, but then you have to write 2 or 3 jokes on top of that, analysing and then pricking the bubble of outrage that is going to come from 1 or 2 people and make a joke laughing at them. Because that's where we are now as a society.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's best of times, worst of times to be a comedian.
Yeah, for us. And then with trigonometry, it's the same. I mean, in some ways, I almost feel like the more successful trigonometry is, the more that's a symptom of a very unhealthy society.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've got to be honest with you, mate. The reality is it is deeply unhealthy the two comedians are having to have these conversations on YouTube instead of the mainstream media doing it properly. But they just don't.
They just don't.
And so the fact that we are having a lot of success with this is actually a sign of things being really bad.
It's my girlfriend made this point. Whenever something goes wrong and I've got my head in my hand, she just looks at me and goes, it'll be good for trigonometry.
And that is why I love your girlfriend.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being a guest on the show.
Well, thank you for being a guest on the show.
Guys, we'll see you in a week with another brilliant episode with someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
See you next week, guys. Take care.
Thanks for watching, guys. As always, subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell button next to the subscribe button so you get notified when a video comes out, and follow us on all the social media @TriggerPod.
And also leave us a nice review on iTunes and spread the word.